Welcome back to another episode of the Life Play Podcast. I'm your host, founder and CEO of the Life Play, Tyler Seward. Today, we have a very special guest and podcast for you all. His name is Dr. Duncan Simpson. Dr. Duncan Simpson has his Ph.D. in sports psychology from Tennessee University, and he is the director of personal development at IMG Academy. Welcome, Dr. Simpson. How are you today?
Great, Tyler. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate your insight, your expertise, and your willingness to come on and share all of that with not just me, but all of our guests.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I know we have a mutual connection with Barry University. So, I'm excited to connect with you, and hopefully we can give something of value to the listeners today.
Definitely. So for those that don't know, you're a sports psychologist. I wanted to originally go into the field of sports psychology because I was an athlete, just like so many that wanted to go on to the next level, but there was lots of mental barriers that stopped me from getting there, right? So I wanted to ask you, for one, where are you from? Did you play sports? And kind of what got you into the field of sports psychology?
Yeah, that's a big question. I'll keep it as concise as possible. I still have a little bit of an accent, but I'm certainly losing it. I grew up in England, and yes, I played sport in high school. I think it's very different in the UK. We played everything from, soccer, tennis, cricket, rugby, track and field, distance. You kind of did everything. That was kind of it growing up. I probably was strongest at soccer and tennis, and so did that. And I went to university in the UK and played tennis there, and played soccer too, but more at a club level, soccer, and played for the university at tennis for a couple of years. But again, I probably struggled on the mental side, especially in tennis. So, through kind of academic journey, did undergrad in physical education, did not want to be a PE teacher. I'm going to give you high level cliff notes. I went traveling and traveled to Australia and New Zealand and Thailand, and then got back to the UK and realized I wasn't very employable. Didn't, with an undergrad in physical education, went back and did my master's. And during that transition, I'd spoken to an old professor who said, what classes did you enjoy? And I said, I really enjoyed the psychology classes. And he said, okay, well, we don't have sports psychology, but we have sports science, but you can elect to do sports psychology as many of those classes as possible. So again, that kind of took me on that path. I got the opportunity to teach some undergraduate classes, and after I graduated with my master's, started teaching full time in sports psychology, but realized, hey, I really, if this is going to be my career path, I really need to learn a lot more about this field, and I need a mentor, and got the opportunity to come over to the US and the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and had a great faculty member, Dr. Craig Risberg, who mentored me there. So kind of that is, a short and dirty, high level career path, as it were. And from there I've gone on and kind of solidified this as my career field.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And then how did you transition into working with IMG Academy?
So as I was leaving academia, after I was leaving my PhD, I'd done some teaching, I'd done some research, I'd worked with some athletes, and I had a great opportunity. I had two jobs. I had one in academia, and I got offered a position at an academy, a tennis academy, doing mental performance work. I chose the academic field because I always felt that I could go. I was told, if I stay in academia, I can go into consulting, but if I go into consulting, I'll never get back to academia. So I took a 1-year position at Ithaca College. After that year, I got a job at Barry University, where I stayed for, I think, 7.5 years. And with my colleagues, Dr. Lauren Tashman and Gualberto Cremades, we grew the program. And from undergrad to, we had a pretty successful master's program there. So during that time, did a lot of teaching and research, working with the Barry University athletic department as well.
I don't mean to cut you off, but quick question. You helped develop the sports psychology master's program at Barry?
Yeah,
Wow.
I did not found it. I kind of take credit for that. It was Dr. Gualberto Cremades, who unfortunately passed away during our time there. But I came in, and there's been other faculty there, but myself and Lauren Tashrin came in with Gualberto, and we grew it to 30 plus students, and was lucky enough to mentor a lot of great people in the field who've gone on and are really successful now. So I was very happy. And during that time, I got an opportunity to come up to IMG a couple of times to visit. I knew some of the staff up here, and eventually I just felt the the thing I was enjoying the most was working with the athletes. I wanted to kind of transition a little bit out of academia, and got an opportunity to come up to IMG and was hired up here. So that was the kind of transition out of academia into more the applied space.
Yeah, that's so cool. And especially now that I go to Barry myself, I'm studying clinical mental health counseling, I know that Barry's sports psychology master's program is very big and it's been a while, it's been around for a good amount of time. And I feel like, would you say it's one of the earliest sports psychology programs in the country? Because there's not that many, right?
It's
Especially
a good,
master's
yeah,
programs.
it's a good question. I think it was, I'm not sure it's one of the earliest, but one that, I'd probably say 15 years ago, I think it was definitely one of the earliest. There's other great programs, Denver, Florida State, West Virginia. And I think since then, there's been a lot of programs that have popped up, but Barry has been around one of the longest. And again, credit to Alberta who set up the program. And even now I have some great faculty and some really strong students coming out of there that I'm connected with. So I'm very pleased to see that it's still going strong.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely left a legacy for sure, and you don't even know it because I didn't know that you were a part of that, and it was very nice, very nice to hear. So you went from working at Barry and then transitioned to IMG. When you first started, what was your position, and how has that position evolved to what you're doing now?
So I came in as the first assistant head of mental performance. The head at the time was Dr. Andrea Whelan, who's a really good friend of mine. I was, you know, with Andrea overseeing the department, I was working across three sports. I was working tennis, soccer, and golf, which three sports that I love. So as well as kind of managing the staff, I was also working with the athletes. Eventually Andrea got an opportunity and left and went to UPenn. So when Andrea left, probably a year after I arrived, I got the opportunity to step up and be head of the department. So I was very fortunate to lead a department for I think three years. So again, as you transition up, you end up doing less and less of the day to day with the athletes. But I still worked in tennis for a good amount of time, and then eventually three oh, 3-ish years ago, I transitioned into my role where I oversee both mental performance and leadership and character development. So we've had a couple of different heads of departments, some phenomenal people such as Dr. Lindsay Hamilton and now Dr. Kat Lutz, who oversees the department. So now I have the privilege of overseeing staff that oversee the staff.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like a big responsibility. Big responsibility.
Yes, and I enjoy it. We have some amazing staff who really impact our student athletes on a daily basis. I feel incredibly blessed to work with both departments. We have 13 mental performance coaches and 4 leadership and character development coaches, and that's headed up by Dr. Pete Pachorek, and he's doing phenomenal work on the character development front.
Yeah, that's so cool. And so I've been to Association of Applied Sports Psychology Conference, and I went last year, and that was the first time I ever seen mental performance coaching live in action. It was at the United States Tennis Association, and they were doing it with two young athletes who were some of the best in the world. And it was so interesting to see, well, for one, that them at that age were able to be self-aware enough to pick up their thoughts when they get emotional or them noticing themselves not going to the routine, different things like that. So I want to get into the nitty gritty of what do you teach athletes and how exactly do you help athletes excel in their sport?
Oh, big question, Tyler. And I'll do my best to kind of conceptualize it for the listeners of how we do it at IMG Academy. So IMG, we one of our starting places, we have a youth athlete mental assessment. So we assess our athletes on 5 different areas, and those are confidence, commitment, focus, handling pressure, and resilience. So those are what we call psychological attributes. Those are the things we want our athletes to become. We want them to become confident and committed and resilient and focused and be able to handle pressure. So that's what we want them to become. And ultimately, how do we get? We look at the athlete, and obviously understanding the sport is what are the mental skills that we need to teach them that will solidify and support that psychological attribute. So if I want an athlete to be confident, some of the skills I may work on are self-talk, body language, mental imagery, as an example. So those are the skills that, again, we'll practice over and over with the emphasis of helping you become more confident. Again, we may practice mental imagery for also to be focused. We may practice imagery to help you become more resilient. So we're teaching the skill, how to do the skill, but with a specific intention at the end of it. So our mental coaches really work on around those 5 factors. Of course, they have flexibility to work with athletes in different areas, but where we, again, focus very much on enhancing skills to impact them in different psychological areas. And again, depending upon the sport, the age, the ability level, all those variables kind of play in. You mentioned young athletes. We have some pretty young athletes. We have postgrads that are 18, 19. So they're very different in terms of their, cognitive, emotional development compared to an 11, 12-year-old. So how we work with those athletes is a little bit of that art and science behind mental coaching.
Yeah, that's so cool to hear. And that's definitely something that I feel like mental performance coaching and just really focusing more on the mental aspect of the sport is something I'll say to me is kind of new. But for you, you've been working in the field for 8 years now, eight to 10 years.
I wish. I graduated in 2009. So I started my PhD in 2006. So probably 18. I've been a professional since 2009, probably 15-ish years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really crazy. And how have you seen the field of sports psychology kind of evolve throughout that time? Because I know that now, just in general, the field of mental health is becoming more talked about thing. You see people like JJ McCarthy. They really highlighted his ability to meditate before the games and work with his sports psychologist at halftime. So, how have you seen this field evolve and have you seen athletes be more receptive to working on the mental side of the game?
The field has definitely evolved. I'd say the one area that really sticks out for me, I'd probably say, going back to my time in the UK, going to classes and taking sports psychology classes, the people I was very aware of were the people who were doing really good research and were doing research out into the field. And we had incredibly strong researchers. And I didn't get a sense that we had a lot of people doing applied work. There were people, and probably the most famous names in the field were doing some applied work, but it was probably more for the professional and elite athletes. I think the proliferation of mental performance now from youth up to professional athletes has grown exponentially over the last 15 years. The military in the US is the #1 hirer of sports psychology graduates. So I think that program, by hiring in a lot of mental performance coaches, I think during my time, the number of mental coaches in Major League Baseball has just, I'd say quadrupled, but it's probably way more than that. Just about every professional team and now most colleges have mental performance or sports psychologists, which would be the dual trained individuals that have a clinical mental health background like yourself and the mental performance. So a lot of colleges now have people in place. So it's an exciting time. It's growing. I think there's a general better understanding that there is a need to support athletes on the mental front. Now, some of those positions are very clinical based, which there's absolutely a need for. And as you with your background and supporting athletes from the clinical mental health, and I also think there's there's an area where mental performance and enhancing performance is really the focus of the work. So again, they're not completely dichotomous. We're working with one individual. However, there's people with different skill sets and different trainings that can best work with individuals. So the field has grown a lot, and it's an exciting time. I think we still have a lot to do. I think we still need to figure out some of the turf wars in our field. But again, an exciting time, more positions than ever. So I think that's where it's enhanced. I think we've probably gone a little bit away from some of the research, unfortunately. So as you go, it's kind of that pendulum, a lot of research to a lot of applied work, and we probably need to solidify some of our research too.
Yeah, definitely. And even from what I've been seeing is that athletes are just more receptive to these working on the mental side of the game. I actually just had a friend of mine, he's playing college basketball right now, and he actually just messaged me, and after probably not speaking to him like consistently for probably like 4 years, just because he's been doing his thing, I've been doing my thing. He texted me, he said, the mental side of sports is real. Is real. And he's been playing high level Division I basketball. And he kind of just now like is realizing it, because especially if you're in high school and you're a top player and you're just doing well and everybody's giving you recognition, all that type of stuff, you kind of you don't deal with that same level of, well, maybe you don't deal with that same level of pressure, that same level of feeling like you're not good enough and all of that. But then you get to the next level and then people are on the same level as you. And then that's when things can feel a lot different, especially going from you're the man, you're the best, all of that, to okay, now you're just average, you're just like everybody else. That's a hard feeling for any person, let alone an athlete with lots of ego and all of that, a part of the sport. So I kind of want to transition from that into, how would you say social media and just the recognition of young athletes nowadays affects their mental health approach to the sport?
Yeah, good question. And I don't know that I'm an expert in this area. Well, I know I'm not an expert, but I can speak anecdotally, having worked with youth athletes for a long period of time, and some of our athletes are heavily recruited and have social media presence and all the rest of it. I think it's a very difficult time for a lot of athletes to work in. We're now seeing, and we IMG conduct NIL education, so the opportunity for our athletes to get NIL contracts and they're not even in college yet, it's pretty mind-blowing. So that idea of having a social media presence, having a value, being a representative of a company, that's a lot to take on for a young person. I think even for college athletes, that's an incredible amount to take on. So the reality is that when we perform at any given task, we really have to be focused on the task at hand. Now, if you have different and sometimes contrasting things that may be distracting you, that may ultimately take away from our performance. So if I start worrying about what my agent thinks, or what my followers may think, if I have a bad performance, if I start putting additional pressure on myself, if I get negative comments, all those things, I think a part of that journey of an athlete, but it's becoming younger and younger. I'm not saying it's correct, but I think once you become a professional athlete, there's almost an acceptance of, there's fame, and, perhaps you're going to get criticized and you're going to have to deal with media. And, those are some of the things that come along with it. You're also compensated and you have to balance that out. That doesn't mean criticism is easy, but I think when the adults, you kind of understand that. But that is now college and now into high school, whereby I don't think all of our athletes at a younger age have the skill sets and the emotional maturity to deal with that. It's incredibly difficult. That's not a criticism. They're just facing a very different reality. Now, with social media, my challenge is that that's not going to go away. The NIL, the new way of college, the transfer portal, all those kind of things are not changing. So how do we adapt, and how do we equip the athletes with the necessary skill sets to meet the challenge? We can't just say get off social media. That's just not going to be a reality for most of our athletes. Most of our athletes have grown up with social media. and again, know it way better than I do. So again, we can't take an older adult perspective. We have to say, okay, this is the reality in which we live in. How do we equip the athletes with the skills to deal with it? So those would be kind of very high level, Tyler. But happy to follow up on any specifics around this.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to know, how do you actually, before I get into this, I want to throw a quick fact in there. Did you know that the more time you spend on social media, the more depressed feelings you feel? I think that's from a either 2016 or 2018 study. I learned that probably in my freshman year of college, and that sticks in my mind all the time. So anytime I'm on social media for too long, I'm like, yeah, I need to get off. I need to get off.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I think there's a lot of detrimental impacts to social media. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm not one of those people that say everything's bad, but there's definitely a lot of challenges. We've seen an uptick in mental health challenges with high school athletes and with college athletes and just the college and high school population, not even just athletes. And I think social media certainly plays a role. There's a lot of variables that play a role in mental health, but I think it's probably more detrimental than it is facilitative and positive. So
Mhm.
yeah, that statistic doesn't surprise me, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazy world we live in. But I wanted to ask you, how do you specifically help athletes focus on the goal rather than, because our mind is complex, our mind, we can tell ourselves to focus on the goal, but it's not as easy as just, telling ourselves to do that. So how do you get athletes to be able to be more self-aware and be able to control their mind in times of need?
Really good question, and I'll connect it back a little bit to maybe to the social media and all the stuff that we've been talking about. As I mentioned, I get the honor of overseeing the leadership and character development department. And part of the work that we do in that department is really talking with athletes a lot more about who they are and who they want to become. And that means as a person, not just as an athlete. When we play sport, it's what we do, it's not who we are. And we can get very wrapped up in our identity as I am a tennis player, I'm a soccer player, I'm a football player. Well, you are someone who plays those sports. That's not that's not your full identity. If it is your full identity, you're going to come up against probably some significant challenges in life when either you get cut, you're not good enough, your career ends, all those things that we know about identity. So we try to really help athletes understand there's lots of different parts of ourselves and understanding their identity, who they are and who they want to become. And that changes over time. And it's complex and it's related to our personality. But also we talk a lot about values and we talk a lot about virtues and how do you want to be in this world? What kind of person do you want to be? Not on the field, not on the court, but what are the things that are really important to you? Maybe it's some of the values that your family have instilled in you. Some of our athletes may come from backgrounds that are not so optimal. So maybe it's, hey, actually, you're fighting against some of the things that you've heard and you've seen. You actually have to change some of that. So again, it's deep and it's important work in terms of helping athletes understand this journey they're on. Because we're a developmental academy. Most of our athletes are then going on to that next stage, right? That's college. Some of them, will be lucky enough to go into the pros. So we're not the end here. We're trying to equip them to be as in the best place possible that when they go to college, they're not overwhelmed by college, so that they can adapt to that environment and they're going to learn new skills and new things in college. But hey, how do we set them up the best way possible can so when they make that transition, they can thrive in college and not just really struggle because it's completely different. Once you go from here to University of Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee or Michigan or Florida, that spotlight is all of a sudden you might be a big deal in high school, but that spotlight with 100,000 people if you're playing football, that's a hell of a lot different. So how do we help equip the athletes to deal with some of those things?
Yeah. And you made a great point saying that you start with values. And it's actually interesting that you just mentioned that, because I just last week in my class, we were learning about existential therapy. And existential therapy, it's when people have an existential crisis, they don't know who they are, or something's happening in their life that just is conflicting with their image, right? And the first thing in that is getting people to list their values. And because at the core of who you are is different than what you do. You know, you being an athlete is not like me. I used to be an athlete, right? And you know, the term ball is life, right? And people take that literally, where when I was done playing basketball, you have that existential crisis of who am I? You know? So
Yeah.
like you said, those internal values are so important in not even sports, but just knowing yourself as a human and really being comfortable with yourself as a human. So yeah, that's a great point that you just made.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential to the work we do, and I think that's, we are a boarding school, so in many cases, our athletes, if they're at home, we hope with strong parenting that they're going to understand and get some of those values. Now, there's cultural differences, absolutely. We have athletes from all over the world, but when they're not at home and they don't have their parents around them, our job is to help support them. Our job is to help develop some of these values. That's not to say that we replace the parents. We don't replace the parents, but we play a critical role in making sure that we support them through this period of their life.
And I wanted to ask you, what are some characteristics of a high level, highly mental resilient athlete?
Yeah, really, really good question. I think the reality of sport, and I'm going to talk very kind of broadly here to start with, Tyler, is that as you've already alluded to, there's a lot of ups and downs. It doesn't matter how talented you are, when you step up to that next level, you're probably going to get beaten down a bit, and you kind of adjust and assimilate to that area, to that level, I should say. So being able to handle mistakes, being able to handle knockbacks, being able to have that drive to keep going. So it's having both the motivation, that drive to do, but also the discipline to do the right things. Those are absolutely critical. We can all be amazing mentally when things are going well. And I talk to our athletes about that. When you're playing at your best and everything's, we don't have to worry about you mentally. It's how do you show up when you're not playing well, you're struggling, you're getting beaten down. Maybe the level you're playing at, that everyone's just a little bit better than you. How do you handle that? Do you kind of go inside yourself? Do you, shy away from wanting the ball? Do you, avoid taking the shot because you're worried about making a mistake? Or do you, hey, I'm gonna prepare better, I'm gonna practice harder, I'm gonna ask for the ball, I'm gonna take the shot, I'm gonna be okay making mistakes because that's what I have to do to get better. So I think there's a lot of things that go into that mentally resilient athlete, but it's really around when things are not going well, how do we handle it?
Yeah, definitely. And that actually reminds me of this new Nike commercial that came out with LeBron. I don't know if you've seen it, but it starts out with a video of him. It zooms in, he's sitting on the bench, his eyes are closed, and he's doing deep breathing. And then there's a voiceover of him. He says, the pressure never goes away. Just I forgot the exact quote. He said the pressure never goes away. Just how I manage them, something like that. Pretty much saying that the pressure doesn't go away. Just he just learns how to manage it, you know? And that pretty much is exactly what you just said. That pressure never goes away, you know? And it's so important to learn how to manage it and speak with professionals like yourself. And it really does make a difference. I'll say someone like me, right? I haven't played like organized basketball since I got done playing, but I'll go to the gym here and there and play. But me being more self-aware about myself as well as knowing some psychology things, it's so much more fun and easy to play basketball because I'm not putting any pressure on myself. There's like I have no reason to put pressure on myself, you know? And then so back when I used to play, that was my main thing. I put pressure on myself. Not that other people put a bunch of pressure on me. It was those perceived pressures. And everybody's perceived pressures are different, you know? Their perceived pressure could be, oh, my parents aren't going to be happy because I played bad, or my coach is going to be angry when I shoot the shot, or I might not get a scholarship if I play bad this game. You know, there's lots of different perceived pressures, and I kind of want to go back to you mentioned that you guys do a questionnaire when athletes first come. So you guys do the questionnaire and then kind of get a score from that questionnaire and work on each aspect that is kind of needs more improving.
Yeah, good question. The athletes take it 3 times a year, so usually at
Oh,
the beginning, the middle, and the end of the year. So we're trying to look at, hey, have we had an impact? What are the areas the athletes self-reporting that they're doing well in? So we use it and we talk about being data informed. So it's not the only piece of information. We watch the athletes, we talk to the coaches, we speak to athletes themselves. And then ultimately, it's up to our mental coaches to decide based on the scores and based on all the information, not just the assessment, what is the areas that we're going to particularly focus on. So, for example, it may be an area, okay, we've scored significantly lowest on, we just talked about handling pressure. Okay, handling pressure is absolutely the lowest score. We need to work on that. Everyone's in agreement. We need to set a plan around handling pressure. Great. But sometimes it might be handling pressure is the lowest, but they haven't got any tournaments or competitions coming up for 6 months. So is that the area that we need to spend time on, or is there something that's more urgent? So we think about periodization of mental skills. We think about the age of the athlete, what's most important to serve as a foundation. So we can go from a weakness-based approach in terms of, hey, this is your lowest score, we'll just do that. Actually, sometimes it's, hey, how do we amplify some of your strengths? And sometimes our strengths can compensate for our areas of deficiencies. So it's not it's an ongoing discussion, a process. We use the staff to kind of, present their plans, present their mental performance plans, have other coaches look at it, question, challenge them. And through that process, we'll say, okay, well, this is the best possible plan. Now, we also do a lot of our delivery in groups and teams. So within that group or team, people have a lot of different needs, which we understand, and we have to sometimes cater to the group that might not be specific to the individual. So then the mental coach can also work one-on-one with the athlete. So as a team, we might be working on confidence, but that one athlete might be very confident, but they need to work on focus, for example. So that's where we do the one-on-one work to really be specific as possible on what are their areas that they need to focus on.
Yeah, I wish I had this many people in support of me in my athletic journey. It sounds like you have the mental performance coach, you have the leadership coach, you have the nutritionist, you have the physical trainer. Yeah, this sounds great, and I know it has to be fulfilling. I know it has to be fulfilling. So how fulfilling is it to work with not even just athletes, but you're working with young athletes? I feel like I'll say me personally, I've done one pretty much like mental performance coaching session with one team, and they were in sixth grade. And it was so fun. It's like so fun. And especially the fact that I didn't have this when I was growing up. So the ability to teach them, especially at that young age, was just the feeling was amazing. So just talk about how fulfilling your job is.
It's a great question. I think it is incredibly fulfilling when you feel like you have an impact on people. So I think there's absolutely moments and athletes and perhaps groups that I can look back and say, I feel like I had a real impact. The other side of the coin is that, I use the idea that, sometimes you plant trees that you'll never see grow, right? So I'm teaching our athletes, and sometimes I don't know if it's resonating. I don't know it's connecting. I don't know it's having an impact, but it may do in college, or it may do in the pros. And you have to be okay with saying, it's not about me. It's when they are ready. Maybe some of this stuff is going to resonate, that they'll go to college and be like, oh, okay. Like, hey, I should have listened a little bit more. Oh, I remember that, and I need to now implement it further down the road. So sometimes, and this is not a criticism of athletes at all, it's just sometimes they may not be ready for the information at that stage of their life. When you do get that athlete that is bought in and committed and wants to do everything that you work with them on, that's amazing. It's a great feeling. I would say a lot of my experience with youth athletes is that we're not quite sure how much is connecting and how much is resonating just because their age group. The other thing that I'd bring up, Tyler, is that, and going into the work that you go into, a lot of times when I'm working with athletes, it's they start working with me one-on-one because they're really struggling. And sometimes it's not about getting them to, hey, we're going to go out, win the trophy, and they're going to, be the best player and, be the LeBron. But sometimes it's just like, hey, this kid is really struggling, and I'm going to help them struggle less. And I'm going to help them that their sport doesn't suck anymore, and that they don't end in tears, and that they can just start enjoying their sport again. So sometimes it's just taking them from a pretty low place and helping them get back to normal. And there's real satisfaction in that. It's not about, necessarily, like I said, seeing the athletes that win the trophies and do that thing, but sometimes it might be a lower level or an athlete that's struggling, and you just help them through a real tough period in their life. And I can point to a couple of instances where probably my most impactful work, when an athlete had a real serious injury and I was there for them, and an athlete was going through some really tough stuff and I was there for them. And it wasn't, yes, it was about sport. Yes, they were an athlete, but it was more about, at that time in their life, I was there for them. And it's not about me. It's just that at different times of your life, you're going to be able to step up to support someone. And I think for all listeners, there's going to be a time in life where you'll get an opportunity to step up. And it might be someone passes away and you have to support a loved one, or you have a younger sibling, or you have a teammate that goes through some tough times, or a friend. It might have nothing to do with sport, but you have that opportunity to be that person in their life. And when you do that, they'll never forget it. And
Yeah.
that's where it's like, hey, if we can do, and I'm probably on the soapbox here, but I think if we can do a better job in society of like, when people are struggling, how do we step up and support those people? Doesn't matter about what we look like, where we come from, politics. Like, when people are struggling, how do we support them and how do we lift them up? And I think that is the work that we get to do, but it's not always glamorous. Sometimes you see athletes really struggle and it's tough, and that's where people like yourself with your expertise really come in. And we work closely with our clinical psychologists, where when athletes really struggle, we have to say, hey, there's people with different skill sets that need to support you here.
Yeah, it's both of our roles are an extremely important role, and people really appreciate it and really need it. And pretty much what you mentioned is empathy, the power of empathy. That's something in our world, especially in this country, that is completely lost, completely lost. And something as small as empathy can just help people see that they're not alone, or help people see that that they don't have to deal with all of this alone. And also, what you do is you teach lifelong skills, even if it is associated with a sport. Teaching someone how to see their thoughts, how to, okay, I see this, and then now I know that doing this will allow me to calm down. These are all lifelong skills that people will hold on to forever. So even if at that moment they don't know it, they definitely, a couple years later or whenever it connects, they will really see the benefits of everything that you teach. And then also, my teacher at Barry, the first class, she said, the first question that I ask my clients is, are you ready, willing, and able? Because if you're not ready, willing, and able, it's not gonna really work. It's kind of gonna be like, I don't know what the saying is, but like, I don't know, opening a jar that's glued shut, like it's hard. So that ready, willing, and able part is definitely extremely important. And yeah, I thank you so much for what you do for not only athletes but just people in our world, because we need more people like you and I. Like, empathy is so important, and it's something that more people need, for sure.
I appreciate that, Tyler.
And I know you just spoke about how fulfilling it was working with athletes, but how fulfilling was it teaching students as a professor at Barry University?
Yeah, it was the thing I loved most was, supporting young people on their journey. I think it was very different teaching undergrad to graduate students. Graduate students, they selected to be in this program. They're excited, and this is an area that they're passionate about. Undergraduate students, it's kind of igniting that wick, as it were, getting them to say, hey, this might be a class that I might be interested in. Some weren't, and some weren't, and that's okay. But I loved teaching at a graduate level and supporting those young people, and very proud of some of the graduates from Barry University who are now, some are working in the pro leagues and some working in college, and some are just doing some really cool work. So again, very, very proud of them. They put in the hard work. We helped put the structure around them and they did the work. So it's, kudos to those individuals.
I actually wanted to be a professor myself. When I first got into the field, I think I would still want to be, but I feel like you need to have your doctorate to be a professor, right?
I think you can still teach. There's places that you can teach as adjunct with a master's degree, especially if you have a clinical skill set. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I think teaching is a skill set that can really enhance your career. Standing in front of people, presenting, articulating, points clearly, making sure people are learning. Like, those are things that you can take into all walks of life. Working in academia, there's a lot of good things about it. And I think a lot of young people don't even consider it. The reality is that if I just take the nuts and bolts, it's a consistent paycheck. You work around young people every day. Every day, the people you're working with change. Every year, they're going to change. There's new people you can impact. So there's some challenges with higher education, but there's also some really good things about it. And I don't think too many people consider it as a career. And it's not, I guess for some people, it's not super sexy, but I think it's a really great path that provides a foundation from which you can then go on and do other things if you wish to. But again, you can make a very nice life for yourself being an academic and working in a university, and you can also still do applied work.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look into that for sure, for sure. And I wanted to ask you about, so you're starting a new podcast called Performance Podcast, correct?
Yes,
So tell us a little bit about what Performance Podcast will be about, and yeah, what it will entail.
So on a high level, we're trying to learn lessons from the world's greatest performers. So what are the lessons that we can take from their journeys and apply it to our life? So how we go about it, myself and my colleague, Dr. Greg Young, we read a autobiography of a performer. And right now we've done mostly athletes and coaches, but we will go into other performers, musicians, different artists. And we break down their autobiographies and their life journeys, and using their words, we read an autobiography. It's a long process. We take the quotes that we pull out, we then reflect on, and we have a back and forth and try and weave their story through.
Mm.
And through that, we try to pick out like what were the key points in their journey, what were some of the themes and some of the lessons that we can derive from their story that might help other individuals. So yes, hopefully there's a bit of storytelling that people might be interested about the athletes, how they got there, or the coaches or the performers, but also there's some key things that you've heard that you can pull out and maybe apply to your own life.
Yeah, that I know people are gonna love that, because the story of becoming an athlete, especially a high level athlete, is a sought out story. It's one, especially when you're younger. It's like, how do people get to this level? Sometimes it can feel like it's unattainable, right? But when people have these autobiographies or they come on podcasts like yours, they'll see that, oh, they started off just like me in a small town, playing in a small town, and then just elevating and going to different heights and levels, and moving here and doing this. You kind of see that things are possible. I feel like that's the most important part about having performers on podcasts, and even just having athletes in general having more of a voice in the world nowadays. It's so important for the next generation, and then also just for people to learn and see that these athletes, performers, high level people, rich people, famous people are human beings just like them. It's so important.
Yeah.
And yeah, something to add?
No, I just said no, I appreciate that. We definitely try to pick out the key elements of their stories, and also there's cautionary tales. We also identify things that you can avoid and challenges that they went through. So, learning from history is an incredibly valuable tool in whether you're in business, whether you're in sports, any walk of life. There's people that have learned lessons before you, and we don't have to go through some of the challenges that they did if we can pick out that lesson. So I think learning from those that have been there before us is a great way to do it.
My favorite book, actually, probably, I think this was low key, low key, the first book that I've ever fully read. This was during COVID 2020. This was right after I went to therapy, and I was like kind of getting out of that depressed stage of, okay, I was just hurt. Our basketball season just ended, the year that I'm supposed to get my scholarship, all that type of stuff, right? I read David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me.
Mhm.
Have you read that book, or do you know who
Yeah,
David Goggins is?
yeah. I have it on the shelf behind me, I think.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, that is an amazing book, and that showed me that your mind and body is capable of so many more things than you actually think. And so I started going on runs. I'm not even a runner. I started running 5 miles, just doing things that I didn't even know I could ever do. And it really opened up my mind of possibilities for not only the future, but just the possibilities of my mind and the possibilities of my body. So yeah, definitely, once again, the stories of people before us are so important. And last, or no, this won't be the last question. So you went from being a professor to then working at IMG, working directly with athletes, and then overlooking the full department. And now you're starting your podcast. So what are some of your future goals and aspirations?
Really great question. I'm ambitious, and I want to try new things. I want to challenge myself and test myself. Hopefully that will be at IMG Academy. I see there's an amazing future for this business, and I love the environment. I love my colleagues, and would love to stay here and be challenged here. The the podcast is less than a year old, so that's something that we, continue to develop and grow, and hopefully, we'll see where the podcast takes us. I'm really enjoying it. It's a lot of work, but again, something that is new to us. We had to take a very beginner's mindset on this. We talk a lot about we've been in the field for 15 plus years, but I've been in podcasting less than a year. So hopefully we're on the right trajectory. I think, episode 1 should not be as good as episode 20, and episode 20 should not be as good as episode 50. So we're continuously trying to get better with technology and storytelling, and the things that we pull out. So where the podcast will take us, I don't know, but I'm excited to continue that journey, and just even through that process, just making connections with people. So I hope I can give back to the field. The field has been very good to me. I support a lot of students. I support a lot of staff, because people have done that for me. So as I get older and a little more seasoned in the field, I hope to be able to contribute and give back to people. So that's really what's up and coming. I don't know in terms of the actual job what that will entail, but just hope to continue to support this field and grow it, and give back to the field.
With the knowledge and information that you're giving out on my podcast right now, and then on your podcast, you're definitely giving back to the field, and everybody appreciates it. So I want to ask you this last question, right? What is the most important thing that you've learned about people through your experience that you can share with our community that will help them live happier and healthier lives?
A lot of questions, man. I think the word that comes out that you've just mentioned probably 5 minutes ago, Tyler, was empathy. Is that what I've learned? I've had the opportunity to travel, and travel in different countries, work in different countries, work with people from all over the world here at IMG, young people, older people, pro athletes, college, youth athletes, that everybody's on their own journey, and everybody's journey looks a little bit different. Everybody's life experiences and backgrounds a little bit different. And what we may see in a brief interaction may or may not accurately reflect. We don't understand or know the full person. And not we haven't fully know someone, but just having empathy for someone and understanding that, hey, everyone's on their journey. And I think 99.9% of people are trying to do their best and they're trying to do the right thing. We may or may not agree with them, and that's okay. We may see something on X or Twitter or Instagram that annoys us, but we can scroll on by. We don't have to argue, we don't have to fight. So I think the word is empathy and just understanding that people are allowed shitty days, and we just got to be a little bit kinder. I know that sounds very hokey. I don't know what it sounds like, but I think kindness, I think especially right now, I think we can all be a little bit kinder to each other and have a bit more empathy for everybody. And if we do that, I think we're on a decent path.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Duncan Simpson, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge with us. It was a great conversation, and I know our viewers will love it. Thank you for coming once again, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Life Play Podcast.